trying to say is these drugs don't actually fix the problem.
Mm.
I was told I would be on medication for the rest of my life. These
Wow.
drugs, they're not meant to fix the problem. They're just a band-aid effect. And I think that as a population, we like that. We like that band-aid effect. We don't like taking responsibility for our own health. We want someone else to come to our rescue and give us something to make us feel better. And I think it was once I stopped doing that and stepped out of that whole idea, that I started to really heal and realized that my symptoms, or the symptoms that led to this diagnosis, were a result of childhood trauma and a result of inflammation and a result of poor lifestyle choices. It was not due to something wrong in my brain.
Welcome to the Conscious Rebel Podcast with your host, Lucy Morningstar.
Right,
Hi, Lisa. Welcome to the Conscious Rebel podcast. I'm so happy to have you.
I'm happy to be here, Lucy. Thank you. It's nice to see you and online, of course.
Yes. Can you please tell us about yourself and what you do?
Well, right now I'm doing an art course, but previous to that, I was working in academia. I was teaching and lecturing in nutrition science. I've got a PhD in nutrition science, and my area of research after my PhD was nutrition, inflammation, and mental health. And my personal experience, I was diagnosed at a very young age with bipolar 1 disorder and medicated, and kind of just struggled with that through my whole life, actually 3 decades. I had children very young. I had my daughter at 17 and my son at 18. And so, I mean, I was obviously high functioning because I managed to hold it together, keep the family unit running okay, but it was definitely a challenge. And then as I got more interested in nutrition and exercise, I did an undergrad in exercise and sports science. So I was always quite active. And I think that saved me in a lot of respects as well, being active and eating quite well at that time, although now I know a lot better. Yeah, so I learnt more about nutrition, more about the root cause of poor mental health, and inflammation is a key player in what we see as symptoms in mental illness. And so I did my PhD on a small component of virgin olive oil, and I saw that it had these potent anti-inflammatory properties. And then started to think, well, if inflammation is a key player in mental illness and food can attenuate inflammation, then surely I can do something myself to make myself feel better. And so I started to delve into the research there and learned quite a lot.
And when was that you found out about the thing in the olive oil and the connection between inflammation and mental health?
So it would have been around 2009, 2010, I think, that I really started to learn more about that, the role that inflammation played in poor mental health. I hesitate now to even use the phrase mental illness. I think that there are people out there with mental illness, drug-induced psychosis, for example, but I actually look at mental illness a lot differently now and just see it as symptoms. And so I went for a long time believing that I had put myself into remission because I did all the right things. I was eating all the right foods. I was really looking after myself. I'd done a lot of research in that area. Whereas now I even doubt that diagnosis. So I've been medication free for over 7 years.
Yeah,
and I'm thriving.
Such a long time.
I'm thriving. I am better now than I've ever been. And I believe that these medications also cause a lot of symptoms. So, for example, well, I'll use depression, because just recently there was a paper published in June this year that really concluded, it was quite a well done study that concluded what several of us have been saying for a long time, is over decades and decades of research, there is absolutely no evidence that antidepressants, or that depression, sorry, is a result of a chemical imbalance in the brain. And antidepressants obviously target serotonin. So why is this being prescribed so readily? So I think we all have to sit back and now question, because these drugs that are prescribed do cause a lot of side effects, do cause a lot of symptoms that are comparable to the initial symptoms that lead to this diagnosis in the first place. So it's kind of like a vicious cycle, really, when you think about it.
Yeah, I think, you know what, from my point of view, anything the big pharma try to sell you are bad for you. That's just my rule of thumb.
Yeah, and it's a good rule of thumb too, because I think you're right. I mean, there are people out there who feel depressed and who will be prescribed antidepressants and say that it helps initially, but long term it causes a list of side effects longer than my arm, and these are long-term side effects too. So when doctors are prescribing these drugs for 13, 14-year-olds or 15-year-olds like myself, that can lead to long-term ramifications for that child. I have always struggled with regulation of emotion, so emotional regulation, and that has been suggested to be a side effect of being medicated so young. So I didn't have that kind of the maturity of learning how to regulate my emotions, because I was always medicated. So it's really an important point that needs to be considered before taking these poor kids off to get them prescribed medication.
Yeah, so when we talk about the side effects, what are some like confirmed side effects? Very few
suicidal ideations, and that's I went for the biggest one first.
Wow.
Straight in. I mean, there's loads of less serious side effects. Uncomfortable though, weight gain, loss of libido, heart palpitations. I'm trying to think of some of the ones that I've experienced. Dryness of mouth. There's sleeplessness, there's a whole heap, but the most severe is suicidal ideations, and that's been found in the literature quite a lot, and yet these drugs are prescribed to very young kids.
Yeah, that's terrible, because if you just think about, you're taking artificial hormones into your body for even sometimes long periods of time. Like, how can anyone with a common sense, like, right?
I think these drugs, I mean, particularly antidepressants, they're targeting neurotransmitters in the brain on the belief that there is this imbalance, and this is what is causing the symptoms. But our body is always trying to maintain homeostasis. So I probably said that wrong. We're always trying to find that balance. So if we're taking a drug that is changing the neurochemistry in the brain, then that's going to lead to alterations in other neurotransmitters. And so once they start playing around with this, it can lead to a whole heap of problems, particularly, as mentioned, there is no evidence at all that there is this chemical imbalance in the brain.
Yeah, the idea of the chemical imbalance affecting your mental health and causing depression has been the narrative for a long time. Even I've had some of my friends believe it, like, they say, I feel depressed. Oh, I must just have this chemical imbalance. There's nothing I can do. There's just some chemical imbalance in my brain. And I think the research that you mentioned came out probably not long ago, right? About how and because of that new research came out, I saw some people then dug up the interview that Tom Cruise did on one of the television shows many years, like maybe in the 90s, very early on, when he was like really still very young. He was talking about how he said that he has read all the papers, research on chemical imbalance and all the antidepressants. He claimed that he read all these papers and he was passionately discussing there's no such thing as a chemical imbalance in your brain. And then apparently he had quite a pushback that some people claim that his career almost ended because he was talking about it on public television. So, it would just like how strong this narrative of chemical imbalance has been pushed on us. And I still have friends who are saying, I just have chemical imbalance and I'll probably need to go on,
Yeah, John Rush did a really good study showing the perceived benefits of antidepressants, and it was a STAR-D study. I'm going from memory here, so I hope I don't mess it up. The STAR-D study, it was done quite a while ago, and he was looking at the benefits of antidepressants. I'm just trying to remember now. And anyway, he basically found that the remission rate of those who were on antidepressants after 5 years were just so low. So basically what I'm trying to say is these drugs don't actually fix the problem. I was told I would be on medication for the rest of my life. These drugs, they're not meant to fix the problem. They're just a Band-Aid effect. And I think that as a population, we like that. We like that Band-Aid effect. We don't like taking responsibility for our own health. We want someone else to come to our rescue and give us something to make us feel better. And I think it was once I stopped doing that and stepped out of that whole idea that I started to really heal and realized that my symptoms, or the symptoms that led to this diagnosis, were a result of childhood trauma and a result of inflammation and a result of poor lifestyle choices. It was not due to something wrong in my brain. So, and that's quite empowering. I mean, it takes a long, long time to get there.
So how do you come to this realization?
Well, again, doing some research and doing the work and working on myself, it takes a lot of time and effort. But then I suppose that's also kind of a risky area, because then I ended up, so the way psychiatry works, for example, you have a set of symptoms and they will assess you. It might be a GP, it might be a psychiatrist. They'll do this assessment. It's a one-size-fits-all assessment. And then they'll go and look at the DSM, which is the statistic manual for use in psychiatry, they can then marry up your symptoms with a label, with a diagnosis, and then they give you the diagnosis, and then you can go and get the drug that's supposed to help this diagnosis. So that's the way it works. They don't ask you, do you eat a lot of sugar, for example? What's your diet like? What's your lifestyle like? Are you sleeping okay? What was your childhood like? They don't ask those questions. They're just looking at these symptoms, and then they're ticking them off. They're ticking all the boxes, and then you get given a label. And for a little while, that label feels good because it explains your behavior. It explains how you're feeling. And so, that becomes your identity. Like our conversation earlier about the transgender, we're all searching for this identity. So then we have this identity. And in my case, once I felt like I healed myself, I then took on this new identity of, I put myself in remission. Now I'm qualified to go and help other people do the same. I have the answers. And it's only been the last couple of years that I've stepped back and said, well, no, I don't actually believe that diagnosis at all. I don't think that I was ever mentally ill. I just had a lot of things going on that produced these symptoms, and then the drugs actually produced more symptoms, and so it went on and on. So, I mean, it's been a process. The whole thing has been an interesting process, really. And I hope that more and more people will reflect on this and maybe question their diagnosis and question what leads to their behavior, because it is really empowering to step into that.
Yeah, when you talk about the DSM, right? Is that a set of questionnaire where you a set of questions that the doctor give you, and then you got I said a scale, or you take yes or no, this that kind of thing?
No, that's not. So the doctor will give you, or a psychiatrist will give you a series of assessments, like a series of questionnaires that if you're young and you're with a parent, or otherwise if you're an adult, you'll do yourself. The DSM is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, and it's a manual. So it's been through a few different, I think we're up to level DSM-5 now, and it's received a lot of criticism from those in the psychological health arena too, because it can lead to a massive overdiagnosis and over prescription of medications too. I totally agree with that. I think that if you're just ticking boxes and then, you know, trying to marry them up to a label, I think we all want a quick fix, and doctors, of course, they want to help us. And so it's just an easy way of going about that. But it's wrong. The whole system is wrong.
Is it as bad in Australia as it is in the US? Really?
Yes, absolutely. Well, I can't say as bad in the US, but it's definitely as bad, or getting as bad, in Australia. It's a real problem, particularly for kids. So yeah, there's an over prescription going on. I think that's the right phrase to use. Doctors are over prescribing meds for young kids, and it's doing a lot of damage. And particularly when there are so many things that, I mean, I mentioned inflammation. There is so much in the research now to show that inflammation is present in all of these so-called mental illnesses. So, you know, there's this linear relationship and predictive relationship, and once the inflammation is resolved, the symptoms stop. So we see that over
Lisa,
and over.
can you define what inflammation is, please?
So inflammation is the body's like natural response to injury or insult. So, you know, we have a whole heap of processes going on, and that's fine. Acute inflammation is great. That's how we're still alive now, because the body is trying to repair itself. But when that gets dysregulated, that can lead to chronic inflammation. And I don't know when, it was quite recently, we've realised that systemic inflammation, so inflammation in our body, can actually cross the blood-brain barrier and end up affecting our brain and our mind.
Can you also, you know, I'm not a medical professional, right? So I don't know what is the difference between acute inflammation or chronic inflammation, and what's it like when I get a throat infection that got inflamed. I obviously can see that, or if my eye got infection, like I can see that. But what are some inflammation that's inside of our body that we can't see, that's actually having more like a chronic or whatever effect that we don't, it's not that obvious?
Yeah, so I'll give you an example. We all know about gut health now, and when we have hold on, sorry. When we have a compromised gut lining, we can have, so we have quite often in studies looking at inflammation, they'll see the presence of lipopolysaccharide. So lipopolysaccharide is an endotoxin, and it's contained in our gut, in our intestines. But if we have a compromised gut lining, that can actually leak out into the bloodstream. So that's one way of finding that you've got inflammation, is that LPS, lipopolysaccharide, will be picked up in the blood. So that then causes an immune response, because the body can sense something coming in, that's a foreign particle that's not meant to be there, and so it will launch an immune response, and that's what causes inflammation. So that can be ongoing if you have gut issues, if you have a poor diet. So, you know, a diet high in processed foods, refined carbohydrates, for example, is going to have an inflammatory process or an inflammatory response in the body. It causes inflammation. So that's why nutrition is so important in controlling inflation. And
so is arthritis also a kind of inflammation?
It is, absolutely. So there's a number of those, and it can also autoimmune. So all autoimmune disease.
Autoimmune disease too.
Inflammation is basically behind all chronic disease.
All
So
right.
everything,
Okay.
yeah, it's big.
All
And
right.
we live in a very inflamed society because our
Mm,
food system is very inflammatory. Stress, lack of
yeah.
sleep, all produces
Yes,
inflammation.
I know, Lisa, you mentioned, in one of our last episodes of the podcast, Madeline talked about plant-based diet, and you said you have some different perspective. Can you talk to us about it?
I've got a really different perspective. So
Yeah.
one of the most inflammatory things we can eat is seed oils. So seed oils have a lot of omega-6. So they're not great. No one should be using seed oils these days, but unfortunately a lot of food producers put seed oils in their processed foods. And I would imagine even when we go to restaurants, etc., our food is cooked in seed oils. So they're all your polyunsaturated, canola, sunflower oils, etc., etc.
Yeah, I've heard
And
that all these seed oils are like pretty bad. So in
they
our
are
house, we cook with coconut oil and olive oil only.
fantastic. That's good. But in addition to seed oils, we also have a food supply that is high in grains as well. So when we're talking about inflammation, it's really important to understand omega-3 fatty acids versus omega-6 fatty acids. So both are
Okay.
important, but omega-3 are anti-inflammatory, omega-6 are pro-inflammatory. So we've evolved on a ratio of 1-to-1, omega-3 versus omega-6. And that's quite nice, like for us to be, balanced like that. But with our modern food supply, we have just so many omega-6 everywhere, even in our meat, that's any grain-fed meat. So in Australia, we're actually okay because a lot of our cattle is fed on grass for most of its life. But then when it comes to being fed grains, that increases the omega-6 fatty acids. Processed food, loads of omega-6 fatty acids, and we're not getting enough omega-3. So this is causing a lot of inflammation in our body too. But if you get back to what I was saying about your conversation with Madeline, when we're talking about meat, good quality, sustainably and ethically raised meat is actually quite anti-inflammatory. And there are some studies coming out of Deakin University Food and Mood Centre that have shown that those who eat the recommended amount of meat have half the risk of depression and anxiety. And even more recently, there was another study, and I think they were looking at about 18 different studies over 160,000 participants showing that eating meat does reduce risk of depression and anxiety. But then we have to think about eating meat that has been inhumanely treated and has a lot of extinction stress. That I think we know it's detrimental for a lot of reasons, but definitely for our health and our levels of inflammation. So I suppose I wanted to give a different perspective. If we're looking at organic grass-fed cattle that has been killed humanely without this stress associated, so killed on site for our food, that is just such an amazing source of nutrients and nourishment for us. I love animals so much, and I really enjoyed that talk that you had with Madeline too, because I understand the do no harm, but I feel that this movement towards veganism and vegetarianism is doing a lot of damage to our health and also to our environment, because when you have do no harm, we can't eat without death occurring. If we're looking at whole monocrops, the amount of insect life and other life, the displacement of animals from their homes and everything else, I mean, it's huge. Again, I don't know the numbers, but I know that a lot of death and destruction occurs with monocropping for a plant-based diet. And we tend to just disregard that because it's only insects and it's only little, field mice and things like that. We tend to anthropomorphize, I think that's the word, beautiful cows with their big brown eyes, and I do it myself. But I think if we had a movement away from industrial farming to more regenerative farming, where the cows are allowed to move from paddock to paddock and they eat the grass just above the roots, that's going to sequester carbon from our environment. It's also, cows have a rumen, like a 4-compartment stomach, so they can take grass that humans can't digest. We can't digest cellulose. They take that, they eat it. The microbiome in their rumen converts that to beautiful, nourishing protein. And yeah, it just seems to be such a synergistic system, but we're doing it all wrong with the industrial farming. So we really need to move into regenerative farming, where the cows are on pasture, and then when time comes to kill them, it's quick and humane as possible, and we still eat meat, but we do it the right way, and we take responsibility for the animal that we're eating, and that means more nose to tail eating. It means less waste. You know, at the moment we're doing it completely the wrong
like
way.
you know, because I've chosen a plant-based diet myself, and from my personal experience, you know, I think when I was very little, there wasn't as much meat. Grew up in China, when I was very little, there wasn't much meat. And then as China started to grow richer and we had more meat, I wasn't very keen on eating meat as a kid. But I was encouraged to. I get praise if I can eat more, you know. But I remember when I came to Australia, there was once I tried, you know, I want to make really fresh food, and I bought a live crab, and I want to, you know, have this really fresh seafood, and I'm gonna kill it at home just before I cook it, so keep the seafood super fresh, right? And I remember when I opened the paper bag, the crab was, you know, its claws like tied up, and I was holding a knife about to kill it. Oh gosh, I couldn't do it. I cried for hours. I couldn't do it. So
I know. It's
and then and in terms of health, I had very weak digestive system and stomach, I think, in my as a child and as a teenager. But then since I changed a plant-based diet, all my symptoms, I would say most of my symptoms disappeared. And I also used to get throat inflammation couple of times a year, and that has also gone away. And from my personal experience, I feel like I don't have the energy like slump in the afternoon.
That's great. And I suppose again it goes down to individual differences, because I had the opposite experience when I went on a plant-based diet. I tried veganism for a while because as I said, I love animals, and factory farming, it just breaks my heart how we treat these beautiful animals. But I had the opposite. It had the opposite effect on me. And I suppose because I have been looking into how to feel better mentally, and it led me down that road to animal products and you know, good quality sources of animal protein. That's how I came to that. But I mean, it's great if you are feeling better. You've got to eat. We all have individual needs and a different way of eating. I hate the fact that vegans and
I agree. I think you know, I think this has been, like I said with Madeline, it feels like it's been weaponized by whoever has the, you know, to has further divide people, control people, make people sicker rather than healthier. You know, even, oh my God, you know, anything kind of have an ounce of good in it, it's been weaponized by the evildoers to, you know.
So true, isn't it?
Or the conspiracy that you know, that goes in. I think whether it's like you know, a meat-based diet or a plant-based diet, you know, I don't want to be dogmatic about either way. You know what I'm saying? Nowadays, if I walk past a butcher, whatever, even when I come close, the smell make me sick. And then I think about, okay, if meat, you know, I'm not denying, of course, meat has nutritional values, but when I think about how the animals are slaughtered, and I just think to myself, okay, those animals for animals are raised in slaughter and then slaughtered and killed, like I just imagine like how what like the fear and the whatever
Yeah.
emotion the animals feeling at that time, like how do I feel taking that inside my body? I can't be good. Like
I totally agree with you. And I believe that this extinction stress that the animal feels before it's slaughtered,
yeah,
I believe that that does translate, that does come through to us on a vibrational level. I totally
yes,
agree with that. I won't touch factory farmed meat, and I am quite dogmatic about that, because for one, I don't like how they're treated, I don't like how they're fed, and I don't want to be part of that at all. Now, unfortunately, organic grass-fed meat is quite expensive, so
yeah,
that forces us then to cut down our meat consumption, which isn't a bad thing anyway, because I mean, you were saying you had very little meat growing up, where we seem to have these big, huge dinner plates now filled with food, and it doesn't need to be like that at all. So I don't think it's a bad thing to cut down the intake of meat. But I personally want to have it for the vitamin B12, for the complete proteins that we're getting, but I want to also know where the animals come from, how it was treated. So I have only just shared this story with a few people because it makes me sound like such an awful person, but I'll share it here anyway.
what is it?
I had a pet pig when we first moved here, and raised her from a baby, and it ended up she was so out of control. She grew so big, and she was terrorizing my grandkids. She was terrorizing my dog. My mother couldn't come over without being knocked over by this gigantic pig.
No.
I mean, she was beautiful. She was absolutely, I was in love with this animal, absolutely loved her. And anyway, so it got to a point where we had to get rid of her, and the options were all bad, because she would have gone to someone who would eat her, like kill her and eat her. And obviously, if that was going to be the end for her, I wanted to be in control of that process. So we ended up deciding that was probably, pigs get very distressed when they're moved, and because she had lived her whole life with us, she would have been very, very distressed, being put on the back of a trailer or whatever, and taken to a different property. And so I didn't want her to go through that, and I wanted her to feel loved all the way through. And so we got a butcher to come to our house, and I fed her a big breakfast full of oats and yogurt and everything else, and she was very, very loved by me. And the butcher ended up leaning over the fence and with a shotgun, and just went bang, and she was gone. And that was it. That was the end of that. Now, we ate her too, so because out of honor for her life and her death, then she became food to feed my family. And a lot of people, even in my family, turned around and said, how on earth could you do that? You are heartless. And yet those same people will eat meat. They'll go to the supermarket, they'll buy pork sausages in plastic wrapping, and have no idea, where that food. Yeah, it is. And we need to be connected with our food. We need to, even for plant-based, we need to understand that for every meal we have, death has occurred. It might be small-scale death. It may be insects, or a bird's nest being displaced, or it may be, big and large. But we have to get back to that, because this disconnect is, I believe, in part causing this increase in poor mental health, and this increase in all kinds of things that we see going on in the world. We need to get back and connect with our food and understand where our food comes from, and play a role in that, before we're ever going to be on the road to wellness. That's just my belief anyway.
Yes, like my kind of utopia kind of ideal will really go back into like a small communities where, because nowadays I think, as when I study economics and high school and university, it's all about how globalization is a good thing, and economies of scale lowers the cost for everyone, so everyone benefits. And now I look back with a different perspective. Instead of just believing what your professor tell you, I really question that narrative. Just look at the things we buy now from, say, Kmart or Target. They may be cheaper, but how long do they last, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Does that really lower our cost of living over the long term, not just like in these 2 to 3 months, right? So and also that is just the immediate financial risk and reward. And you think about the impact on the society, right? Like we talk about the big industrial commercial animal farming, or the grain. Like the grains probably when I started plant-based diet, and we were warned by people like Rich Roll, right?
Yeah.
About gluten, because the wheat that we have now is very different than the wheat what our grandparents would have, right?
Absolutely.
Probably the rice too. So why? Because everything is industrialized, and the people who own this are people who were actually the Nazis, who Bayer and that kind of people. They control the seeds. So my idea is like a small community, and we have our own, and in that way, whether you are eating more plants or eating meat, just like have your own chicken, or the next door, or the guy in the next town have cattle. It's just so different than you just go buy from the supermarket and have a total disconnect from what you're buying.
Absolutely. I think that's definitely where we've gone wrong, but I think that we will have to go back to that way of living, because all the systems are collapsing. And I mean, for some that seems to be a scary prospect, but I actually feel like they need to collapse. We need to do things differently, because the way where we're headed, particularly this fourth industrial revolution, it's not the way humans are meant to live. It's not biologically how we're so mismatched with the current environment. A human biology is mismatched with the current environment that we're living in, from fake lights and screens all the time to everything, actually. And I think we're at that crossroads now where something's got to give, something's got to change.
Yeah, and the mental health, right? It seems like they are trying to devastate us on every level, like the food, for example, and the toxins that put into our food, our water, that they spray in the sky, and also just the policy that they are imposing on society, right? Trying to separate us. And I think didn't our suicide rate or something and depression has gone up like a few times in the last 2-3 years, right?
Yeah, well, understandably too. I mean, those lockdowns were always going to cause a major epidemic of suicide and mental health issues. I mean, we need to connect with people. We need that connection, and now we're lacking that. I had a conversation with my mum this morning, funnily enough, about how when she used to go to the movies when she was young, she said ushers would take us into our seats and we'd talk to people on the way. And going into a bank or something, you'd be talking to the teller for a while. Everyone knew everyone, and there was always there was that connection there. Whereas now, computers do everything for us, and we just have to make our own way around. It's just there's definitely a separation that is becoming stronger every day. That's what it feels like anyway.
So like what are some things people can do, like from your research, people can do to start taking care of their mental health? And like how should people, if say someone, they are feeling depressed right now, what are some things that they recommend they start? Where do they start?
I would say, I always start with diet. So cutting back sugar is, I mean, it's obviously longer term effects from it. It's not, you're not going to feel better overnight, but just making small incremental changes such as cutting back sugar, that's number one, and watching gluten intake, very, very important.
Gluten.
Eating, sorry? Gluten,
Watching
yes,
gluten,
yes,
yeah.
definitely. Yeah, gluten's very inflammatory. Eating more anti-inflammatory foods such as salmon, fatty fish, seeds and nuts in moderation, vegetables. I'm just trying berries.
I want to ask you about the salmon, because you know, I'm not sure if you've seen the documentary Seaspiracy on Netflix.
Yeah, I have. If you can get Atlantic red sockeye, I think it is salmon, that's been sustainably caught and fished. I wouldn't personally eat salmon from one of those farms. Again, it's exactly the same as factory farming, and it's not great for human health.
Yeah,
so
because
again,
like right now it's really hard to tell, even if the salmon, they're like are they really just like orange or like the real salmon, or they have been dyed? Like you go to how do you know?
Well, you can tell with red eye. I think it's red eye. I hope I'm getting that right. The Atlantic salmon is kind of a red color, whereas if you see lots of white and orange in the fish, then that leads me to believe it's very fatty and it's been farmed as opposed to fresh caught. So that's the way I always tell. I wouldn't eat an orange looking piece of meat that you can see all the white through it, because obviously the fat in fish also contains the toxins. So if it's very because the fat draws the toxins. Yes. So that's just personally how I go about it. But, you know, I mean, there's other fatty fish that you can eat too. Sardines, I don't love them, but, you know, sometimes we just have to take a hit for our health. And you take omega-3 supplements as well. I mean, there's a lot of controversy about mercury, but we find that with our whole food system, we have to be careful.
The toxins is in the whole foods, like in whether you eat animals or plants or fish or whatever. So the toxins everywhere. Like you know,
find glyphosate is in our water. It's everywhere, raining down
it's in the
on
water.
us.
Yeah.
So it's really important to have a good detoxifying regime as well. So
what do you do for detox?
Well, I'm really, really lucky because I have an infrared sauna. And that was, I know, I'm very, very lucky. So I take regular saunas. I use zeolite, which is a spray that binds to, charcoal, activated charcoal. So
I haven't tried activated charcoal. Do you actually eat it, or what do you do?
Yeah, it just comes in a capsule. And it binds to a lot of things.
Not our charcoal that we use for drawing.
No, definitely not. Munching down on a charcoal pencil during a sketch. No. No, not a good idea. So they're my main things, I think, for detox. I'm just trying to, sleep is very, very important. And I think we're all a little sleep deprived because obviously we have blue light from our screens, and that tends to wreck melatonin production. I suppose I've always tried to get morning sun and look into the sun while I'm out. I take my dog for a run every morning and try and get out there early and get some sunlight.
Well, what if I'm not a morning person?
Not a morning. What time do you wake up, Lucy?
Well, around 9 o'clock.
Oh, what time do you go to sleep?
Around 12.
Around 12, okay. So, you get a good 9 hours, and you feel good on that?
Yeah, I basically when my head hits the pillow, I'm out in a few minutes, and often I wake up a bit. I actually wake up a bit earlier, but I enjoy just half of sleep and trying to remember my dream because they're always so sweet.
That's good.
Or even if they're nightmares, I just really enjoy like that fantasy space. And so I just stay a bit more reimagining my dream until, oh gosh, I really need to get up. I'm feeling a bit like need to stretch.
Wow, that sounds good. I wish I was a little bit more like that. I'm kind of, if I wake up too late, I feel like I'm running late for something and I'm go, go, go. So it would be nice to be able to relax like that.
Yeah,
So
like
it's
the
good.
thing for me is just I need the daylight is better for painting, right? Because I have it's because at night if you turn on your even studio light or that all those light, then the lighting, the reflection, everything just isn't as easy to work with natural light. So that's why
Yeah.
try to do the painting during the day. That's otherwise I feel like more energized in the late evenings.
Yeah, well, that's good. Again, it's so individual, isn't it? And we all
Yeah.
need to honor our individual differences rather than, going with this one size fits all approach to everything. The ideal amount of sleep for people, for humans, is 6 to 8 hours. So I suppose, but we're always going to have outliers and people going on either side of that. So I always feel better if I've had 7 to 8 hours, definitely. So yeah,
These are all,
sleep
I
is
want
really
to
important.
I also actually want to go back to the omega-3, right? Because we always often hear omega-3 are in fish, but I think like I add omega-3 to our diet with chia seeds every day, because I think there's a lot of omega-3, like chia seeds has very high
Yeah,
omega-3. And if the
flaxseed.
yes, and if the fish have high omega-3, wouldn't the seaweeds and all the sea plants have high in omega-3 too?
No, I don't think so. I know
No?
seaweed's important for iodine. I don't think it is
Yeah,
high in
iodine is
omega
really good.
three.
I think
Yeah,
doesn't
yeah, it
iodine also
is.
help with detox, right?
Yes, it can do. I don't know a lot about it. I haven't
Okay.
actually done any good research into that, other than the fact that I know that most of us are quite deficient in iodine because we
Yeah,
don't
I
have
think
good
about
sources in
iodine.
soil.
I've actually this last couple of months I started having those, go to the health food store and get those seaweeds, right? Not the processed seaweed, but actually the dry seaweeds from the health food stores.
Yeah, yeah,
Because after I watched the documentary by The Truth About Cancer, they did some documentary and they mentioned iodine, mentioned some research done on the Japanese people that are actually probably before the Japanese diet was more westernized, and they I don't remember everything, but basically what I got from it is that they studied those people who lived a very long life, right? 90s,
yeah,
100 around, and they
yeah.
found out actually their body has a lot of cancer cells, but they all didn't grow out of control, like just very contained, so didn't even have any health effect on them, to devastate their health. And like controlled the cancer cells development was actually the iodine that helped with that. So we all have,
Yeah.
these rogue
They
cells
would
in our body.
they would probably have quite a low sugar intake too, because sugar feeds cancer cells. So I've actually seen that in a lab
Wow.
with
What happened?
cancer
What
cells in a
what do you
petri
see?
dish. So
Yeah.
sugar, carbohydrates do feed cancer cells. When they're starved of sugar, they tend to not proliferate and get out of control. So I think I always go back to, I'm like everyone else. I like sugar. I have a sweet tooth, but I always feel much better when I take that out of my diet. I feel much, much better, much calmer, much more steady in my mind, clearer. So yeah, I always go to that. There was something else I was just about to say to you too, and I don't want to forget. Anti-inflammatory foods, virgin olive oil.
Oh, yes,
So
yes. We started with that.
pour it over everything. It's gold. It's liquid gold.
So
So
with olive oil, can I actually heat it?
yes, you can, absolutely. So a colleague of mine was doing a whole heap of research in the stability under heat, and more along the lines of the phenolic component of olive oil and whether it or not that's maintained, because that's really important for the health benefits. But you can definitely cook with olive oil. And I mean, again, I wouldn't burn it, but you can cook with it. But it's much better just poured over
Yeah.
everything.
Yeah, and olive oil
It
is like
has
really amazing. It makes
it
everything taste
is.
pretty good.
Yeah, it does. It certainly does. And I mean, it's got 36 phenolic compounds, and all of them, all of the 36 compounds have some kind of anti-inflammatory, antioxidant property to it. So it's
Yeah, I love
just great.
I love olive oil. You know, I don't
Good.
have a sweet tooth, so that's not my weakness. My weakness would be gluten, because I love my wheat, my noodles, dumplings, bread.
Yeah. Do you like sourdough?
Yes, I do. I eat
Sour,
sourdough every day.
okay, well, sourdough is the best that you can get because the fermentation process. Do you happen to make your own, or do you buy it?
I buy it.
Yeah,
I
might
can't be
like to
bothered.
make it's not that hard when you get into it, mind you. I say it's not that hard. I'm not making my own at the moment, but it's, you get that sense of satisfaction from it too. But fermented foods are fantastic for gut health as well. Not so much sourdough, but other fermented foods, because that's another thing we really have to focus on with mental health is our gut health, because it's intimately connected, and if we've got poor gut health, then more than likely we will have poor mental health as well.
So how is that connected?
So the gut brain axis for one, and if something goes wrong in our gut, then if there's any dysbiosis, then we're going to feel it, anxiety or depression. And even, you know, there's always that uneasy feeling in the stomach that can then translate to anxiety in the brain. So it's definitely all connected. And there's a lot of research now just showing that association between poor gut health and mental illness, or symptoms
So you
of
think, you know,
mental
how our
illness.
mental wellness illness has like really come to the forefront of things, right? Because even look at the trans people, like, to me, they are either, well, they're really mentally unstable. Even, you know, we'll talk about some celebrities like Ellen Page, that has made the headline. Like, she gave interviews on this, on that. She doesn't seem happy to me. Like, what kind, like, oh gosh, think about it. You have to hate your body so much to chop off your boobies.
Yes, yeah.
No matter what you say,
Totally
I
agree.
feel so comfortable now in my body. Like, you have to hate them so much to do that to
Yeah,
yourself.
yeah.
You can phrase it however you want. I don't believe you're happy. Like, it's impossible.
No, I think it's great that you've actually come out and said that, because I think a lot of people are too afraid to actually state the obvious. And that is that whether or not, again, I hesitate to use the phrase mental illness, but I believe childhood trauma, I believe that disconnect and that whole idea of, you know, our human biology being mismatched with our environment. I believe all of those factors are playing a role in this transgender movement that we're seeing happening. And again, I think it's a group, well, I was going to say a group of people, it's more than that now, are very unhappy with themselves, and they've found community, they've found a sense of belonging, they've found their identity, and that's what's fueling this whole movement. So no, I believe that childhood trauma and inflammation are probably the root of people who are feeling so misplaced in their body that they want to change genders, or they want to be non-binary. I believe that it's all connected as well.
Yeah, because you know, as inflammation cause, you know, can cause mental problems, then that how they, right, are purposely putting toxins in our food and create a culture where people are more addicted to processed food, high sugar food. It kind of like fit to each other, become a downward spiral, right? And then
Yeah,
adding up to the social pressure, the social narratives.
absolutely. Yeah, hit the nail right on the head, Lucy.
And it's disheartening to see, you know, our art community and even, you know, people who work in the spiritual field, even holistic health, a lot of people who call them healers, have fallen for this narrative.
Yeah, and I'm not sure that, well, maybe fallen for it. I don't know. I think everyone is so scared of appearing to be excluding others, and to be scared of appearing to be a bigot. I mean, I personally posted something on Instagram and had someone call me a TERF. I didn't even know what that was, so I had to go and look it up.
I was educated.
Exactly. I mean, I'm the furthest thing from a radical feminist that there is. Like, I'm not that person. But I can see that this whole trans movement, and it's funny how we're now moving from mental illness to the trans agenda, but it's a movement, and it's funded by lots of big money. It's got wheels, or it's a machine now, is what I'm trying to say, and it's moving at a fast pace. So I think a lot of people are just jumping on and going for the ride rather than standing up against it.
Yeah, so, and I got a coach who initially agreed to go on my podcast, but then she pulled out after I make the post that men can't be women. And the reason she said, she doesn't disagree with me, but she's afraid to be seen as condoning to my view and alienating her, offending her audience. So and I said, well, that here's your understanding of our current state of free speech, right? If you can't
yeah, absolutely.
So that really absolutely. So yeah, I understand, especially a lot of people, artists and coaches, they have their business online, and they are so afraid of being called names or that kind of stuff, and that affect their bottom line. And I think whoever, those people who engineer and promoting the hidden hand, whatever they will call them, they know this about us, about our behavior. They know so much about our behavior, our individual behavior. They know this is going to happen. They know people who,
absolutely.
That's why I think if we can find the strength and courage to just speak about it, stand our ground little by little, because if they take more and more ground from us, at this stage, you think as long as I don't express my opinion, I'll still have my customers. I'll still do my life as I would, right? That nothing is really affecting my personal life. But they're just going to take more and more from us. And
you can apply that. Yeah, you can apply that to absolutely everything, whether or not it's speaking out and pushing back against this trans agenda and taking away biological sex from our kids, or whether it's being forced to take a medical injection, even though we know, you can apply it to absolutely everything. Once we go along with the narrative just to be safe and to not lose friends and family and everything else, well, you may as well just give up then, because there's going to be something that comes along that you are dead set against, that is wrong, but you're just going to go along with it because that's the way you've lived your life. So we have to speak out about it. We have to push back as much as we can, because soon we're not going to have a choice if we don't. And this is for future generations. I mean, it's really the survival of the human species, because I can't see us surviving very long as genderless, sexless,
Exactly. And you know what? This trans thing has been so promoted and favored by TikTok, right? You know how the young generation, a lot of them are on TikTok. And remember how Trump tried to ban TikTok in the US? I really don't understand how people can't see that TikTok is owned by the Chinese Communist Party. And while the Chinese in their own land, they're promoting, really macho soldiers fighting the invaders and fighting the West, evil West. Inside they have these movies and how the Japanese and the West are so bad and invading us, and how the Chinese people have very good at martial arts, kicking their asses. And they ban feminine looking. I think they even banned some Japanese and Korean films because the men start to appear very feminine. And at the same time, on TikTok, they promote through the algorithm, they promote this trans narrative, and how everyone in China, because before China was really open to the rest of the world, Thailand was a very popular tourist destination. And it still is. you know, because it's close, it's cheaper to go to Thailand than Europe, right? And you know how in Thailand those boys they look like women, that's been like a culture, like attraction, you know, for a long time. And those boys, they will come from the poorest families, the lowest social class, and they had to sell their boys to those mafias, to this industry, for a living. Like those boys are like, you know, it's not a life that you will want to live. Okay, it's a really heartbreaking, a bad thing. It's because for people who didn't really have freedom or any other means of sustaining themselves, they had to sell their boys, and the boys had to be, you know, subject to that kind of life. And in China, everyone knew, like, oh, you know, it's good to, you know, probably be fun for tourists to wear, like to be, you know, as an attraction. But, you know, think about from anyways. So, but everyone in China who been that know that, well, while it's fun for them to look at, no one wanted them or their boy to be in that situation, right? But now you see how in the West, it's a popular, trendy thing. It's popular and trendy, and you see the celebrities who had all the money and the fame doing that to themselves and promoting that narrative. It's so upside down and twisted.
I know it is.
This TikTok CCP promoted that to destroy the West through this.
Yeah, and that's exactly what it's going to do, destroy the West, that's for sure. I saw, may have been on Twitter, a woman who had a 4-year-old son and, you know, had him under the banner of a trans girl, although did state in this post that he identified as a boy and was happy being a boy, but he was a trans. He was dressed in a dress and everything else. Like, this is the mentality that these women and parents have, that they're using these kids to appear themselves as being trendy and in vogue. It's obscene. It's child abuse. It's complete child abuse. Yeah, it's not good. But we could talk on and on and on about this, I'm sure. I'm sorry, we went everywhere, didn't we?
Yeah, well, you know, I think it's an important topic, and not many people are willing to speak up, you know, especially publicly, for the fear of you know, pushbacks and all that kind of stuff. So thank you so much, Lisa, for
it was a pleasure. Thank you. And thank you for doing the same. As I said, it was so nice to see your posts and you speaking out about all of this, because it's just so wrong on so many levels.